To complete the sequence on environmental accounting, let's look at what corporations are doing. Companies report their performance, including their environmental performance, to a range of stakeholders. That is obviously the shareholders, but also the people who are planning to invest in that company. They report their performance to the people who buy their stuff or who are thinking of buying their stuff. They report their performance to the people who work for them or who are thinking of applying for a job, and they report their performance to the regulator, sometimes with an eye on steering regulation into a particular direction. There isn't much economic theory on corporate social responsibility or how these accounts should be done, but we do have the words by Milton Friedman, and most famously he wrote, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. He clarified that by writing, there is one and only one social responsibility of business to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits so long as it stays in the rules of the game. It is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. Responsibility of business is to make profit, to make money. But he clarified that further by arguing the corporate executive has direct responsibility to conduct business in accordance with shareholder desires. That is, to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. And it's that final clarifier that is particularly important. Because if you want to make profit, if you want to make money, you need to be able to sell things. So you need to convince your customers that you are a good company. And another way of making money is to make sure that you do things in the best possible way. And that is to hire the smartest workers and the people who work hardest. So you also need to convince the people who work for you that you are a good company, because if not, they will go and work for somebody else. Of course, you also need to convince politicians that what you're doing is ethical and sound, so that they don't slap burdensome regulation on you. So it is not just that you have to stay within the law, but if you want to make profit, you actually have to be seen to be good. Now, instead of taking you through what little theory there is on how this should be done, I thought it would be more insightful to look at the reports of the 5 largest companies in the UK. And they're listed here. The first one on the list is HSBC, which is a large bank. And the first thing, if you go to the environment chapter of its sustainability report or its social responsibility report, the first thing that jumps at you is that they plan by 2025 to have $100 billion of sustainable finance on its loan book and in its investment portfolio. And they have reached roughly a third of that already. Now this sounds impressive. $100 billion is a large sum of money, but they do not put it in context. Is this 1% of their loan book, or is this half of their loan book? Doesn't say anything like that. It also only says that they want to invest in sustainable companies that make wind power and those sort of things. But it doesn't say we're going to steer away from environmentally unfriendly companies. No, it just says, well, this is our target. Nothing about its target compared to its own activities or how it relates to the market as a whole. They also say things about their operational performance. That is, by 2030, they want that 100% of the electricity that is used within their offices is renewable. and again they release about a third of this. So that says something about things that are going on within the company, but that's the only thing that they list. They brag about the environmental rewards that they won. That's what's going on here. They're the best, Asia's best bank in sustainable finance. They're the best, but does that mean that they're any good? We don't know. It could also be that the rest is just so awful that they come out tops. And then they include this statistic here that 2,300 of their employees have been given sustainability training. But doesn't say anything about that sustainability training. Does that mean that these people have sat through a seminar, maybe slept through a seminar, or have they actually been taught something useful? So this is glossy and nice and it seems impressive, but if you start probing, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. Unilever is the second company. Unilever definitely shows more things than HSBC does, and it emphasizes three things. It sells good products, it has good processes, and it's a good employer. The first thing they highlight is that they contribute to the health and hygiene of 1.24 billion people. And this is, of course, just saying that Unilever sells a lot of soap, which is good. Soap is good, but it is perhaps not something that particularly contributes to sustainability. It's just their core business to sell soap. Another part of the core business is to sell food, and they highlight here that they do a lot on nutrition, which is also important. Here they're a little bit more concrete. They say we're going to sell products with less salt in and less fat and less sugar. So that is good, provided that people want to buy it, right? And they can convince people to eat less salt. That would be good. The next thing they emphasize is what is going on in their factories, and they're hoping to reduce CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but are actually increasing it still. They are hoping to reduce water by quite a lot, and they've done some of it, and they're hoping to cut waste by a lot, and they've actually done more of that. They're actually closer to the target than the previous two things that I mentioned. And this is just what is going on in their factories, and we try to do that as good as we can for the environment. They also emphasize the stuff that flows into their factories. This is the sourcing of their material, and they list here they use a lot of palm oil, both their food and their soap, and they only want sustainable palm oil, for instance. So this tells you something about the stuff that they make and what they make it from. And then finally they emphasize fairness in the workplace, which is a good thing. They also talk about inclusive business, and that's actually not the people who work for the company, these 750,000 smallholder farmers that you see listed here are people who deliver to the company, but they're not on the Unilever payroll. And then they have another big number here, 1.73 shopkeepers, 73 million shopkeepers. Again, these are not people on the Unilever payroll, but these are people who sell their stuff. And yes, they will have an impact on those, but it's not directly in their control. And then they want to create opportunities for women. By 2020, we will empower 5 million women, and we have already done 1.85 of those. there's not that many people working for Unilever. So this is again, and the photo that you see displayed here, the opportunity that is created for women is that I think that is dishwasher liquid. That the dishwasher liquid is better than the dishwasher liquid from the competition, and that improves the lives of people who use dishwashers. It's not just women. So it looks nice and impressive and has a friendly font and everything. But if you start probing, some of it seems to be more for show than for real. The environmental report of British Petroleum is much drier, and it shows a number of indicators, and the focus is on the operational performance of the company. So this is over 3 years their greenhouse gas emissions. And it's an abuse of graphics here, so time runs from bottom to top. So 2016, 2017, 2018, and you see that the emissions that come out of their operations, that is refining and mining, have fallen. Some of that is explained by change in size, so they also do the emission intensity, and that has fallen steeper, so they have grown their business while emitting less CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So that is good, and their energy efficiency has improved, and that is true across different parts of business. So that just tells you they are getting better at what they're doing. They also, that is not on the slide here, but that is something that they do, is they argue for climate policy. And you may think, well, that is very noble of them. Why would a fossil fuel company argue for climate policy? And the main reason that they're engaged in this debate is because they realize that climate policy cannot be stopped, and they want a sensible climate policy, climate policy that works for them, rather than let climate policy be set by environmental activists, for instance. And that is why they do this. Important to note here that BP emphasizes what is going on within the company, but they take no responsibility, no liability whatsoever for the emissions from the products that they sell. Right? They're focusing on what is going on in our refineries, what is going on in our oil wells, what is going on in our gas transport of natural gas, but they're not taking responsibility for the stuff that they sell. Company number 4 is BHP Billiton, which is a major mining company. Like BP, they are focused on operational performance. So they want to keep, that's what it says here, we want to maintain greenhouse gas emissions at or below 2017 level while growing the business. So their focus is on efficiency. But they actually failed to do so. They actually saw a 1% increase in emissions. They report 0 significant environmental events, which is just a euphemism for spills. Right? It's a mining company, and occasionally they dump lots of cadmium or other chemical stuff, toxic stuff into rivers, and they have not done so in this particular year of reporting, which I believe is 2018. They want to reduce freshwater withdrawals, but they've actually increased it. No, this is a reduction. They've actually decreased the freshwater withdrawals, and they want to do some other stuff with such words. They also, because this is a corporate social responsibility report also report on other things like work safety. 2 people were killed in this year. Mining is a dangerous business. They hope for 0, but it did not quite get there. They also care about what is going on in the communities. 0 significant community events. There were no riots, essentially. And they gave 70.7 million to community programs. That's charity. 70.7 million sounds like a lot of money to you, but it's not to a company the size of BHP Billiton. So that is what they report. It's limited, but there is not that much puffery as you saw in the Unilever report. Final company is AstraZeneca, which makes medicine and those sort of things. The first thing that they list is that they have 60 new focus areas identified, that 100% of senior executives have a sustainability initiative, and they have more than 25 performance metrics and performance targets, and actually track their metric. Well, they seem to be particularly proud on creating paper tigers. Again, like Unilever, yeah, they sell medicine and they train people to use that. It's not just medicine; they also sell medical equipment, and apparently they've trained 35,000 people to use their equipment and to properly administer their medicine. This is just core business. This is not something that you say, oh, we've done good. No, their core business is to heal people. So yes, they've done good. They also talk about their environmental performance. Again, this is within the company, but then at least for greenhouse gases, they don't use a whole lot of energy. But it said that 61% of the energy is now sourced from renewables. They reduced 8% of their water use. Importantly, for a company like AstraZeneca, now they say that 93% of the discharge from their factories and from their suppliers is now safe. And 93% is good. It still means that 7% of these medically active substances, these substances that are designed to change the way the body of a mammal works, is discharged into the environment, and God knows what happens there. And then they report on the share of women in management. Say that 83% of people who work for us would like to work for us. They could, of course, also report that 17% of their employees are not so happy. They also, and that's fair enough, they report of 57 instances of non-compliance with the Code of Ethics. And then if you read the fine print, that's per 1,000 employers. So they do breach their Code of Ethics quite a lot. But in fairness, they do report these things. And this statistics here is not at all flattering. One thing I forgot to say, and that is the very fine print here. There's this little mark here, and then if you read here, it says this number was actually verified by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And a lot of these corporate social responsibility reports are indeed audited. But what the audit does is to check that this number is true. The audit does not say this is the right number to report or this is a sensible thing to say. It just says, yeah, it was a 1.85 million. So the takeaway message from all this is that there's a lot of glossy material but little standardization. You would be very hard pressed, of these 5 companies to say, well, this company does well and this company doesn't do so well. There's just no comparison between companies also within the sector. If you compare BHC Billiton, which is roughly in the same business as BP, which of the two is better? Well, that's actually a hard thing to discern from these reports. Of course, you can't compare BHP Billiton directly to AstraZeneca. It says what they've done, it says what its targets are, it doesn't say whether those targets are sensible, it doesn't say, well, this is what they could have done. So these are nice things, they are there to impress people, but they're really more marketing tools than analytical tools. I talked about auditing already. There is certification of these things. Sustainability sourcing, for instance, they mention fair trade, and if you follow certain procedures, then you're allowed to use the fair trade mark, and that provides sort of a minimal quality check, but it's not particularly difficult to get these things. And there isn't a lot of checking on what companies are really doing. So these labels that you often see, there's a great many of them, and some of them are strict. Many of them are fairly loose, so certification imposes very little discipline on companies. So to wrap up, there is progress towards environmental accounting, and I've showed that for both countries and for companies. There 15 years ago there was hardly any of this stuff. Now you find lots of numbers, you can find lots of numbers, but that is mostly what it is. These are numbers rather than insightful numbers.